Hi, my name is Frank Heile, and I'm going to present a two-agent model of the human brain which provides an explanation of consciousness. I've been developing this model for more than 20 years. It has significantly changed and I hope significantly improved over those 20 years of research. I'm also writing a book about this model with a tentative title of Consciousness and Spirituality Explained. This talk corresponds to part 1 of that book, An Explanation of Consciousness. This particular video is a 20-minute summary of a much longer video that I have available on my website, and I will be putting little notes up like this, referring you to that longer video for more information about various features I present here. Here is a list of the forms of conscious awareness that I will be able to explain in this talk. I will explain the distinction between phenomenal consciousness and access consciousness, and I'll explain these 3 types of human consciousness. This explanation is based on 3 key ideas. The first is the good regulator theorem, which proves that a good agent needs to have a model of the world where the agent operates. Second, I'll propose a two-agent model of the human brain. And third, I'll be using attention schema theory of consciousness proposed by Princeton neuroscientist Michael Graziano. Here's an outline of the talk. And what I'm going to be presenting is a high-level functional model of the brain. It's kind of what you would design if you were going to engineer a brain from scratch. But you can see that we have a lot of ground to cover, so let's dig in and start with descriptions of agents and world models. Now, an agent is an entity that has goals, a way of sensing the world, and a way to make changes to the world to achieve those goals. Humans have lots of goals, and they can be put into 3 major categories, such as to survive, to reproduce, and to be social. And we can certainly sense the world and change the world. Therefore, a human being is an agent. Now, the good regulator theorem says that every good regulator of the system must be a model of that system. A regulator is an agent, and the system is the world where the agent is trying to achieve its goals. Therefore, a good agent needs a model of the world. For this theorem, they have defined a good agent as an agent that is optimally simple and optimally effective. These 2 requirements here go into the claim that it must be a model of the system. This means there must be a kind of isomorphism, which is a one-to-one mapping between the states of the agent and the important states of the world. If you don't meet those requirements of being optimally simple and optimally effective, instead of being a model of the world, you would simply contain a model of the world. So we can assume that humans contain a model of the world. Now, if the agent is part of the world, then the agent needs a self-model. Now, the question is, do we experience the world directly, or do we only experience our model of the world? Well, colors can help answer that question. The way colors work is that the eye sends to the brain the equivalent of these 3 black and white images of the scene that we're looking at, and the brain takes that information. It's just taking in information, and it produces this colorful image. Those colors do not exist out in the world. They are made up entirely by the brain. Now, some people object, yes, but the colors tell you about the wavelength of light that is entering the eye. Colors are actually more complicated than that, and I'll illustrate that with the color illusion. Now, in this image, the left and right rectangles there don't look like they're the same color. The left one looks like a bluish green, and the right one looks like a yellowish green. However, they really are the same color, which I'll demonstrate by erasing the purple and orange bars over the bottom half of this image. And there you see that you have 3 different color experiences, and yet exactly the same wavelengths of light are entering your eyes from those 3 regions. The reason I'm talking about an illusion like this is that I claim that the illusion is the model of the world that we're living in. It is not the actual physical world out there where these would all be the same color of green. Further evidence for this is that what we experience is not what the eyes send to the brain. The problem is that in the human eye, the visual acuity is very high in the center of vision, but it drops off rapidly as you move out from that center of vision. And yet, we don't see the world as being blurry in the periphery. The reason we don't see that is because we experience the world model. And the world model knows that the entire scene is crisp and in focus. It knows this because you've looked around in scenes before and you never experience blurriness in an area where the eye is sending a blurry image to the brain. Another piece of evidence from vision comes from rapid eye saccades. A saccade is when you move the center of vision from one fixation point to another fixation point very rapidly. It turns out that while you are moving your eye there, you are blind, and we do not experience that blindness. Furthermore, between the beginning and the end of the saccade, the image that's on the retina shifts by a large amount as the eye moves. And yet we don't experience the world moving. We experience that the world is stationary. So you don't experience what the eye is sending to the brain, you only experience the world model. Furthermore, I claim that sensory experiences are completely arbitrary. For example, in vision, there are 3 kinds of photoreceptors in the eye, and those photoreceptors are sending those signals to neurons in the brain that are processing those particular kinds of signals, and that eventually gives you either the red, green, or blue color experience. Now, if we could magically go into the optic nerve and swap the neurons around there, then when you experience a surface that used to be blue, you will now experience it as red. This shows that the arbitrary colors that we see out in the world there are made up by the brain. They do not exist as a property of anything in the world. And in fact, each sensory experience is an arbitrary label for a particular property or aspect of the model of the world. For example, the red, green, and blue visual experiences are approximate labels for the wavelength of light in the model of the world. And the experience of our own body is the experience of our own self-model in that model of the world. All of this leads us to conclude that we are human self-models living in and experiencing the model of the world. Now, it's commonly said that perception is about identifying and interpreting sensory information. I think a better definition is that perception is the experience of our world model. So let's go on to the 2-agent model of the human brain. The 2 agents are the controller and the modeler. All the inputs to the human are on the left here, so the sensory inputs and language inputs are on the left. The control of the body and the language outputs are on the right. And the modeler is the agent that constructs the model of the world. It does this by taking the sensory inputs and updating the sensory world model. It can also take the language inputs and update the abstract conceptual world model. Now, these are not 2 separate world models. It's really a continuum going from low-level sensory concepts up to the high-level concepts that we use in language. Now, the only action that the modeler takes is to direct attention. The modeler also includes intuition and the goals and the self-models of all 3 of these agents. On the other hand, the controller is the agent that controls the body and produces the language output, and it also produces the inner voice and inner visualizations that we experience. Now, if a part of you is wondering, what is that inner voice that he's talking about there? That's it. That was your inner voice. Now, we can also have conscious visualizations where we imagine something is happening in the world. Now, I'm going to refer to these as just thoughts, and these are the conscious thoughts, which can either be verbal thoughts or visual thoughts. The controller also produces all the feelings and emotions that we experience. And finally, when the modeler is directing attention, what it's doing is it's trying to find out what are the most important parts of the world right now, and it's trying to ship that information over to the controller through this interface. Directing attention to an object results in the experience of awareness of that object. Now, this is the focal attention mechanism that gives us the focal awareness experience. And here's an example of focal attention. Now, the main way we direct visual focal attention is by moving our center of vision onto the object that we want to be aware of. But you can also direct peripheral visual attention, and I'll demonstrate that here. If you keep your eyes on that green star in that center house in this image, without moving your eyes, try to identify what the color is of the house to the right of that star. And now try to identify the color of the house to the left of the star. You should have been able to experience yourself directing visual attention to the right and to the left to recognize that the house on the right is blue and the house on the left is yellow and orange. Now, there are 2 models involved in this focal attention mechanism. And this focal attention mechanism is a very complicated mechanism. It probably uses billions and billions of neurons in the brain over a widely distributed network throughout the brain. And the good regulator theorem says that in order to control this focal attention mechanism, the modeler needs a model of that mechanism. And the focal attention schema is exactly the simplified model of the focal attention mechanism that's required. Now, this focal attention schema includes, for example, the modality of the sensory input, or if it's the inner voice or feelings, those are also modalities. It can involve the location of the targets if they are locations in the visual world or locations on the body. And it could also be any specific features you attend to, like the color of an object or the shape of an object or the texture of an object. And then there is the actual focal model, which is the contents of awareness. So the 2 models in this focal attention mechanism are the focal attention schema and the focal model. Now let's look at what that focal attention schema looks like. When you were keeping your center of vision on that center house, your center of vision focal attention schema, which is this black arrow, is centered on that house. When you directed some peripheral attention to the house on the right, there was an arrow to the right, and a house on the left, there's an arrow to the left, then back to the center again. So that's how your focal attention schema changed. Now the world model didn't change as you directed focal attention around like that. What did change is the focal model. When you were on the center house, you had just an image of the center house essentially. When you included the house on the right, you had more information about that. When you included the house on the left, you had more information about that. So that's how the focal model and the focal attention schemas are related. Now the focal attention schema is a simplified model of the focal attention mechanism, and the focal attention mechanism gives us the focal awareness experience. A preview of attention schema theory is that the focal attention schema is a simplified model of the focal awareness experience. You can see that this statement almost follows as a logical consequence of the two previous statements. Now let's talk about a different kind of awareness. Again, keep your center of vision on that green star in the center house there. Now drop that focal attention on that house, keeping your eyes centered on the house, and instead pay attention to the entire screen, all the houses on the screen at the same time. Now expand it out to beyond the edges of the screen to all the objects in the room that you're in right now. You can experience there's a diffuse awareness of that entire room. And yet if you try to describe any of those objects that are out in the periphery, pick an object that's outside of the screen and try to think about it to yourself and describe it to yourself. What is that object? What is it? What color is it? What shape is it? Things like that. You'll find that you can only do that if you direct focal attention to that object. So this is diffuse awareness. Now remember that the focal attention mechanism had a focal attention schema and focal models. I'm proposing that a diffuse attention mechanism has a diffuse attention schema and a world model. So this is the first hypothesis about the diffuse attention schema that is similar to the focal attention schema of the focal awareness world. So we now have 4 objects altogether, and these objects constitute the complete world of the modeler. So the modeler constructs the world model, it constructs the focal model, and it has the 2 different attention schemas as models of the 2 different attention mechanisms. Similarly, we would say that the diffuse attention schema is a simplified model of the diffuse attention mechanism, and the diffuse attention mechanism gives us the diffuse awareness experience, and we can extend attention schema theory to say that the diffuse attention schema is a simplified model of the diffuse awareness experience. It turns out that there are 2 types of focal attention. Top-down focal attention is when the attention target is chosen by the controller. Bottom-up focal attention is when the attention target is chosen by the modeler. My second hypothesis about the diffuse attention mechanism is that it is the mechanism that finds the bottom-up attention targets. So we have 2 functions for this diffuse attention mechanism, and I'm proposing a third hypothesis, which is that it also updates the world model based on the current sensory inputs. The justification for saying that all 3 of these are implemented by the same diffuse attention mechanism is that all 3 of these functions require that attention is paid to the entire world model. So let's talk about these attention mechanisms now. So in the modeler's complete world, there's the focal attention mechanism that implements those 2 functions, and the focal attention schema is a model of the focal attention mechanism, which means that it also models those functions that are being performed. Then there's the diffuse attention mechanism that implements those 3 functions, and the diffuse attention schema is a simplified model of that mechanism, and it's also a model of those 3 functions. So let's look at how the diffuse attention schema updates the world model. My hypothesis is that this diffuse attention schema is continuously scanning the sensory input and detecting objects in that input, and then it's comparing the objects that it finds there to the objects in the world model. If they're the same, then nothing happens, but if there's some difference, such as this red flashing square, the associated diffuse attention schema arrow for that location in the world model will get activated. The first thing that happens is it copies the new object to the world model, and now that finishes the updating the world model mechanism, and it goes on to the finding bottom-up focal attention targets. Now, it may be that this is an innocuous change here and no focal attention needs to be directed to that object, in which case the diffuse attention schema arrow would just become deactivated again. However, if this is a significant change, then the diffuse attention schema will be copied over to the focal attention schema, and that new changed object will be copied over to the focal model. Now notice that the diffuse attention schema stays activated even when it got copied over to the focal attention schema. That's because the diffuse attention schema is also keeping track of all the focal attention targets. So that red and black arrow there would also have to have activated arrows in the diffuse attention schema. And then finally, The focal attention schema and the focal model are what's shared between the modeler and the controller. So that's what goes across that interface between the two. So you could essentially say that the focal attention mechanism spans from the modeler to the controller. Now the diffuse attention mechanism is confined entirely to the modeler, and therefore only the modeler can have diffuse awareness, but both the controller and the modeler can have focal awareness.
This model of awareness can explain why we can only be aware of senses, the inner voice and visualizations, and the feelings and emotions. Basically, this has to do with the diffuse attention schema arrows and the world model. This model explains why all the other brain processes are completely unconscious. The full explanation of this is available in the long video on the website. So let's go back to look at attention schema theory. In order to apply the attention schema theory to an agent, we need to have the agent's self-models. So let's look at those self-models. The controller self-model has two parts. In the abstract conceptual world model, it is the I, me, my concept. And in the sensory world model, it is the body schema. The modeler self-model also has two parts. In the focal awareness world, it is the focal attention schema. And in diffuse awareness world, it is the diffuse attention schema. A full explanation of this is available in the long video on the website. So we can make a chart of the self-models. Attention schema theory says that these two different attention schemas are all awarenesses. So the modeler's self-model is awareness itself. Whenever you experience awareness, you are experiencing your own modeler's self-model. Now the human as a whole has some combination of the controller and modeler self-model shown above. Attention schema theory says that an attention schema is essential for awareness. The only agent in this model that has an attention schema at all is the modeler. Therefore, the modeler is the only agent that is aware all by itself. In order to get three conscious agents, we need to combine the modeler with the other agents to get a conscious agent for the controller and for the human as a whole. So the modeler all by itself is conscious, and we would use the modeler's self-model of awareness when we are applying attention schema theory to the modeler. The controller would be combined with the modeler, and we would use the controller's self-model when we are applying attention schema theory to the controller consciousness. The human consciousness would be a combination of the controller and modeler's consciousness, and we would use a human self-model that would be a combination of the controller and modeler's self-models in various proportions.
So since the modeler is the only agent that's conscious all by itself, let's define fundamental consciousness as the modeler's consciousness. The distinction between phenomenal consciousness and access consciousness is that phenomenal consciousness is experience. It is the phenomenally conscious aspect of a state, which is what it's like to be in that state, i.e. the qualia. Qualia is a term invented by philosophers to describe the experience of the red of sunset or the pain of a headache. Access consciousness is the availability for use in reasoning and in guiding speech and action. Only the controller reasons, speaks, and acts, so only the controller will have access consciousness. I'll also use the terms phenomenal awareness and access awareness interchangeably. The hard problem of consciousness is to explain phenomenal awareness. I claim that phenomenal consciousness only occurs in the modeler and access consciousness only occurs in the controller. So how is it that the controller can report the colors of objects, for example? If our focal model is this apple, how could the controller report the color of that pixel? What happens, I believe, is that the focal model is not just the image there, but it's also everything that the modeler knows about the objects in that image. For example, it would know there's a pixel type object here which has a color of lime green, and this is the word label for that color property. And at the same time, the modeler would have the experience label of that experience of the lime green color. So for the color property, there are two possible labels, the lime green word label or the lime green color experience label. Similarly, the object as a whole here would be a green apple object, and this would be the brown stem object. So let's look at the hard problem. From the controller's point of view, I, me, my is looking out through the sense organs and seeing a green apple out there in the world. This green color experience seems like it is out there in the world on the surface of that apple. This is hard to explain. How can an experience exist out in the world? On the other hand, the truth is that information is coming in from the apple, and the information goes through the sense organs into the modeler, and the modeler constructs a model of that apple. When the modeler directs attention to that apple, attention schema theory would say that the controller would have the awareness of the green color of the apple. But notice that this green color experience is only in here in the world model. It is not out in the physical world. This is much easier to explain. The green experience is the label for the color property of the object. And everything is completely arbitrary in here. So not only is the green experience made up by the modeler when it's creating the model of the world, but the experience is also made up by the modeler. The experience is a property of the attention mechanism there. The attention arrow there has that property of experience, and it's just made up by the modeler. So I don't think this is a really hard problem in this model. This model also has some predictions about the neurocorrelates of consciousness. And for the access consciousness, it would say that the focal attention mechanism is what should be the neurocorrelates of consciousness. And that has been measured experimentally. The problem is that the diffuse awareness comes from the updating of the world model and the finding of bottom-up focal attention targets. And these networks would always have constant low levels of activity. That makes them very difficult to detect in an fMRI machine, for example. However, I do have a proposal for measuring the NCCs of phenomenal consciousness if you see the long video. Now, attention schema theory says that the attention schema is a model of awareness. The focal attention schema is a model of focal awareness of the focal model, and the diffuse attention schema is a model of diffuse awareness of the world model. In pictures, the attention schema model would be expressed like this for focal attention schema, and like this for the diffuse attention schema. So let's apply this to our agents looking at objects, concepts, and to the self itself. So the self model is aware of the object, or the self model is aware of the concept, or the self model is aware of the self model itself. For the controller, focal awareness expressed in words, it would say, I am aware of the object, I recognize the concept, I am aware of me. In terms of qualia, it would be the awareness of the object as a sensory experience, or the recognition that the concept is a real concept, or the awareness of the body. These would be the sensory or qualia experiences. Now let's look at the modeler's focal awareness models. Here the focal attention schema is the self model of the modeler. So that's awareness also, and you end up with a lot of awarenesses here. And when you make all the substitutions and figure out what you're actually experiencing, you end up with having a selfless awareness of objects, a selfless recognition of concepts, and a selfless, locationless, objectless awareness of awareness itself. Now, this awareness of awareness can also be expressed as a sense of presence, which is a selfless, locationless, non-physical existence. Now let's apply the same thing to the modeler's diffuse awareness. Here you have diffuse attention schema is the self model, which is also diffuse awareness. So when you make all the substitutions, you're experiencing a selfless awareness of the world model, both when you're trying to experience the world model or when you're trying to experience yourself in that world model. You get exactly the same experience. Now, non-duality is said to occur when one experiences that the self-other distinction is an illusion, and non-duality would certainly apply in this case. An equivalent way of experiencing non-duality is to say that the world and I are one, and again, that experience of non-duality would also occur in this model. So fundamental consciousness is selfless. The focal self-awareness gives a sense of presence, and the diffuse self-awareness gives a sense of non-duality. Let's look at possible human self-models. I claim that the normal modern human identifies completely with the controller. The normal modern human thinks that they control the body, they have all their thoughts, they have all their feelings, it's all about the controller itself. I claim with some meditation practice, some of the modeler's self-model gets mixed in with the controller self-model. After all, meditation tries to control attention and to notice awareness. Now, in the flow state, I claim that there's even more of the modeler's self-model built in, and the properties of the flow state are exactly what you would expect for an agent that has a lot of modeler self-model built into it. And I claim that in more persistent enlightened states have even less of the controller self-model built into them. And therefore, enlightened states would be something like this, where you go to more and more of the modeler self-model and less of the controller self-model. So the question is, who are you? You would be the normal modern human if you control the body, if you produce speech, thoughts, and feelings, and if you only have focal awareness. If you change from having focal awareness to recognizing that you are awareness, then you are the modern human with meditation practice. In the flow state, your awareness is totally absorbed by the current task, and your actions and awareness are balanced and completely unified. In the enlightened state, you are awareness itself. You are aware of the body moving, of speech, thoughts, and feelings, but you have no sense of agency, because agency only comes from the controller. So fundamental consciousness is the fully enlightened state, with a sense of presence and a sense of non-duality. So I've explained these forms of conscious awareness, and that's the end of my Part 1 explanation of consciousness. In the book and in another video, I will go on to Part 2, which is an explanation of spirituality. What I would do in this model is to rename the modeler as the experiencer. I would also decompose the controller into the thinker and the doer. And this would allow me to explain additional properties and kinds of consciousness, the fundamental differences between humans and animals, a rare neurological condition called autoactivation deficit, and the reason for the development of spirituality and the benefits of spiritual practices. Here's the bibliography for Part 1. And I welcome feedback. You can contact me through my website. And the most important thing is to click on the Sign Up Now on almost any page of that website. If you do and fill in your email address, I will send a very, very occasional email when there's new content available on the website or when the publication of the book is finally going to be announced.
That's it. Thank you for directing your top-down focal attention to this talk.